Sarah Miller's thin, calloused hands paused midway as she was trimming the faded gardenia petals, her eyes locked onto a boy and a girl, cautiously creeping toward her porch. The 79-year-old widow felt her heart race as each tentative step echoed in the quiet afternoon. The boy's tousled curly hair bobbed slightly with each step, while the girl's braids swung gently over her shoulders. But it wasn't their cautious steps that unsettled Sarah. It was the fear she saw in their wide eyes, a fear no child should have to bear. When the children finally reached the porch, Sarah held her breath. They looked up at her, their small faces filled with anxiety, and their hands tightly clasped, as if that was the only thing keeping them safe. Then in a voice so quiet it was almost carried away by the wind, they uttered words that would disrupt Sarah's peaceful life and pull her into a nightmare she never thought she'd face. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching or reading this from in the comments. And if this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on more heartfelt stories like this one. Sarah Miller sat on her old rocking chair on the porch of the small house she had lived in for over 40 years. She was 79, with white hair neatly pinned up, and her thin yet skilled hands were checking the hydrangea and lavender pots she tended to daily. To her, the garden wasn't just a way to pass the time, it was where she kept the memories of her late husband, Robert. Every flower, every branch reminded her of the afternoons they spent together, laughing and making plans that felt like they would never end. But now, all of that was just memories. That day, the weather was beautiful. The soft afternoon sun bathed the neighborhood in a light golden hue, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees. But the neighborhood Sarah once knew was now so different. When she was younger, this street had always been lively, filled with children's laughter and neighbors chatting over fences. But over the years, things had changed. Many families had moved away, leaving behind empty houses or strangers who Sarah never got to know. The quietness sometimes made her feel like the last person left from a beautiful bygone time. Without Robert, loneliness weighed on Sarah each day. Simple tasks like watering the plants, pulling weeds, and trimming flowers weren't enough to fill the emptiness in her heart. The house was quiet at night, with only the soft hum of the TV and the creaks of wood as the temperature changed. Every evening, as she looked at the armchair across from her, she could almost imagine Robert sitting there, smiling at her like before. But it was all just imagination. Loneliness was a companion Sarah didn't want but couldn't escape. Still, Sarah didn't let herself dwell in sadness for too long. She kept her routine of caring for her garden daily, as if it was her only connection to life. She believed that by tending to the flowers, she was also nurturing the memories of Robert and the happy times they shared. That afternoon, as she was trimming the lavender, Sarah noticed the empty house next door. It had been months since it was put up for sale, and she had grown used to seeing the "for sale" sign in the yard. But today, something different made her pause. The sound of an engine rumbled in the distance, and soon a large moving truck slowly pulled up and parked right in front of the vacant house. Sarah looked up, her pale blue eyes glinting with curiosity and hope. Could it be that someone was finally moving in? The heavy truck came to a stop, and for a moment Sarah's heart felt a little more alive. The thought of new neighbors brought her a sense of excitement. Perhaps it would be a young family with children's laughter, or maybe an elderly couple like her, people she could sit and chat with during the quiet afternoons. Sarah wiped her dirt-covered hands on her apron, then stood up, trying to look busy but unable to hide her eagerness. She stared at the truck's door, waiting for the moment the new owners would step out. Scenarios ran through her mind. If it was a family with young children, would they like visiting her garden? If it was an older couple, would they share her love of tea and stories about the past? Sarah never thought she'd be this excited. After so many years of living alone, the thought of someone new moving in brought her a reason to wake up each day with fresh joy. Maybe I'll hear the sound of children's laughter in this neighborhood again, she thought to herself, smiling gently. However, deep down, Sarah felt a vague sense of unease, a strange feeling as though something wasn't entirely right. But she quickly dismissed the thought, reassuring herself that it was just her loneliness making her overthink. The truck creaked as the door opened, and the first person to step out was a black woman with natural curly hair. Amanda looked youthful, probably in her early 30s, wearing a light blue dress that stood out in the twilight. Her face showed a mix of worry and hope, a sign of someone starting over in a new unfamiliar place. Sarah tilted her head, watching curiously, hoping for the best. Right after Amanda, two small children jumped out of the truck, a boy and a girl around 7 years old. The boy, Ethan, with big round eyes and slightly messy short hair, clung closely behind his mother. The girl, Olivia, wearing a pale pink dress with her long hair tied into two neat braids, walked slowly, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the new surroundings. The two children seemed shy, holding hands tightly as they looked around the new neighborhood. Sarah smiled softly at the sight. It was an innocent sweetness she hadn't seen on this street in a long time. A warm feeling rose in her chest. Perhaps these children would bring back the joyful laughter she had long missed. Maybe her dull, lonely afternoons would soon be filled with their visits exploring her little garden, talking about flowers, or simply laughing together. But that curiosity and hope quickly mixed with a bit of doubt when Sarah saw a man step out from the driver's seat. Rick, nearly 40, tall and muscular, with pale skin and short hair. He wore a tight-fitting t-shirt, revealing his well-defined muscles, and his eyes immediately scanned the house and the street as if evaluating everything. Something about Rick's presence made Sarah uncomfortable. She had hoped this man was the father of the children, but the stark difference between him and Amanda left her confused. She began building scenarios in her head. Maybe this is Amanda's new boyfriend, or perhaps she's recently divorced and is looking for a fresh start with her two kids. But even as she tried to rationalize everything, Sarah couldn't shake the gentle yet distinct unease in her heart. Rick slammed the truck door impatiently and walked over to Amanda and the two kids. When Ethan and Olivia saw him, their eyes immediately dropped, and they clutched each other's hands tighter as if seeking comfort. That small action didn't escape Sarah's notice, and she furrowed her brow. Those weren't the signs of children who felt safe and secure. Amanda tried to smile when she noticed Sarah standing by her garden. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Sarah felt a warmth from Amanda's smile. It seemed like she was friendly and eager for a good start. Sarah smiled back and waved gently. Amanda raised her hand in return, but before she could say anything, Rick stepped in, almost blocking her from Sarah. "Let's go inside," Rick said, his tone curt and unfriendly. Amanda hesitated for a second but then nodded and led the two children inside the house. Sarah stood there, watching the door close behind them, feeling a sense of disappointment. Rick's attitude left her with the unsettling feeling that something was wrong. As the moving truck drove away, Sarah remained where she was, her eyes fixed on the new house. It was strange how they only brought a few small suitcases, no furniture or boxes. They don't have much stuff, or are they running from something, Sarah wondered, and the unease in her heart grew stronger. But she reassured herself that she shouldn't speculate too much. "Maybe they just need time to settle in," she whispered, trying to quell her worries. She then turned back to her flowers in the garden, but her mind couldn't stop thinking about the new family next door. A mix of loneliness and curiosity lingered in her heart, and deep down, she knew this might be the beginning of something unusual. That evening, after eating a simple dinner alone, Sarah cleaned up the dishes and returned to the living room, where her small TV was playing a wildlife documentary. She sat in her old armchair, clasping her hands together and letting her mind drift with the soothing narration of the program. The small fire in the fireplace flickered, casting a cozy warmth, but it couldn't chase away the vague worry stirring within her. Her eyes occasionally flicked toward the window, looking over at the house next door. The curtains were still drawn from when they had first moved in. There hadn't been any sounds of laughter or signs of activity from inside, which Sarah found odd. She had witnessed many families move in, and the first night was usually filled with voices, the sound of unpacking, or children running around. But in this house it was nothing but eerie silence. Sarah tried to convince herself that perhaps they were just tired from the move, but still, she couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort, as if something dangerous was lurking just behind those tightly shut curtains. As the clock neared 10, Sarah was preparing for bed when suddenly a loud noise echoed from the house next door. It sounded like something heavy had been thrown down or a door slammed shut. Sarah shot upright in her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. She held her breath, straining to listen. Then came the screams, high-pitched, gasping, and full of terror. A child. Sarah tensed, her unease turning into a sharp worry. There was no way she had misheard. Those weren't the usual playful noises of children. They were panicked, chilling screams that made Sarah's blood run cold. And then, everything went silent. She waited for a few more seconds in tense anticipation, hoping to hear something that would explain what had just happened. A dropped item or a child startled. But instead, there was only deadly quiet. The low hum of the TV in the living room seemed meaningless in the suffocating stillness. Sarah sat there, gripping the armrest of her chair, her mind racing with frightening scenarios. Something was definitely wrong. Those screams were too real to be mere imagination. She stood up, walked over to the window, and gently pulled back the curtain to peek outside. The house next door was still, bathed in the dim light of the street lamp. There was no sign that anyone was in danger. No one came out, no lights were on in the house, and everything was far too quiet. But the heavy feeling in Sarah's chest couldn't be easily dismissed. She wondered if she should go over and check on them. But what if it was just the kids being mischievous or a regular accident? Would she be seen as the nosy old neighbor? Sarah had been in uncomfortable situations with unfriendly neighbors before, and she didn't want to cause trouble right away with this new family. Yet the image of Ethan and Olivia flashed in her mind, their scared eyes when Rick appeared, and the way they clung to each other for protection. Those screams earlier, brief as they were, seemed like a silent cry for help. Sarah hesitated for a few seconds, but then reassured herself. Maybe it was just a small incident. Moving is always stressful, especially for kids. She forced herself to return to her armchair, trying to sip her now cold tea. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't calm her racing heart. Those sounds kept echoing in her mind, like a vague warning of something terrible happening. Sarah promised herself that the next morning she would bake something and bring it over to say hello again. Maybe during the conversation she'd get a better sense of the family's situation and find a reason to ease the worries swirling around in her mind. If something was wrong, she would know. With that thought, Sarah turned off the TV and extinguished the fire, but her mind still couldn't rest. As she lay down in bed, her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. She couldn't shake the fear gnawing at her thoughts. The feeling that something was seriously wrong in the house next door clung to her, making it difficult to fall asleep. When sleep finally overtook her, Sarah had made a crucial decision. Tomorrow she would find a way to see Amanda and the children again. Whether it was just her worrying needlessly or something truly terrible, she couldn't just stand by and do nothing. And with that thought, Sarah drifted into a restless sleep, not knowing that the next meeting would change her life forever. She couldn't just stand by. The next morning, Sarah woke up early, long before the morning light had a chance to seep through the curtains of her bedroom. The previous night, she had tossed and turned, torn between ignoring or intervening in what might be happening next door. She knew she couldn't ignore the unease in her heart, and though she wasn't sure what was really going on, she understood that this family needed her to reach out, if only to let them know they weren't alone in this unfamiliar place. Sarah chose her traditional apple pie, the dish she always used to begin a friendship. As the sweet smell of apples, cinnamon, and butter filled the kitchen, she felt a bit more at ease. Perhaps all it would take was a little kindness and openness, and she could create a connection with Amanda, maybe even find a new friend. After the pie had cooled, she carefully placed it on a porcelain plate, covering it with a clean cloth. She stood before the mirror, adjusting her silver hair, and then slipped on her favorite cream-colored cardigan. Today, she wanted to look warm and approachable. Stepping outside, Sarah felt the cool morning air as she made her way toward the house next door. But from a distance, she could already feel something wasn't right. The curtains were still drawn tight, just as they had been the night before, and there were no sounds of movement from within the house, even though there were two small children inside. She took a deep breath and tried to push down her growing sense of worry, telling herself that perhaps they were still sleeping or tired from the move. Sarah stood at the door and pressed the bell. The sound of the chime echoed in the still air, loud enough to send a small shiver down her spine. She waited, hoping someone would open the door and greet her with a friendly smile, but there was no movement. She pressed the bell a second time, holding it down a little longer. After a few seconds, the door opened and Amanda appeared. Amanda stood in the doorway, her face showing clear signs of exhaustion. Her curly hair was slightly messy, and her eyes were dark with circles, as if she hadn't slept. But when she saw Sarah with her gentle smile and the apple pie in hand, Amanda tried to muster a weak smile, though there was a flicker of tension and anxiety in her eyes. "Good morning," Sarah said softly. "I'm Sarah, your neighbor from next door. I thought I'd bring over some apple pie to welcome you to the neighborhood." Amanda nodded slightly, her smile sad and weary. "Thank you so much," she replied, her voice soft but sincere. "I'm Amanda." Just as Sarah was about to continue the conversation and ask a little more about their new life, Rick appeared behind Amanda, stepping out from the shadows inside the house. Rick was tall, his muscular frame imposing, and his eyes cold and scrutinizing. He stood right behind Amanda, almost blocking the doorway, as if to guard his territory from intrusion. Rick's gaze towards Sarah wasn't friendly, but full of suspicion and hostility. "Who is this, Amanda?" Rick asked, his tone harsh. Amanda stepped back slightly, as though Rick's presence caused her to shrink. "This is Sarah, our neighbor. She brought us some pie to welcome us," Amanda answered, her voice barely a whisper. Rick glanced at the pie, then at Sarah with a look of distrust. "We don't need anything," he said bluntly. Sarah kept her smile, though her heart was troubled. "I don't want to be a bother," she said gently. "I just wanted to say hello and invite you over for coffee whenever you have time." Rick smirked, but it wasn't a smile, it felt more like a sneer. "We like our privacy," he replied. "If we need anything, we'll let you know." Sarah noticed Amanda glance at the two children, Ethan and Olivia, who were standing just inside, peeking out from behind the wall. Both looked scared, holding each other's hands tightly, their eyes filled with apprehension as though expecting something bad. "Actually," Amanda started to say something, but Rick quickly cut her off. "Thanks for the pie," he said, grabbing the plate from Sarah's hands rudely. "We're busy now. We'll talk later." The door slammed shut in Sarah's face with a force that made her flinch. She stood there for a few seconds, staring at the closed door, her heart sinking with a deep sense of unease. Rick's coldness and controlling demeanor left Sarah unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Amanda's sad smile, the children's frightened silence, these were all clear warning signs. Sarah slowly made her way back to her own house, her heart heavy. She had met difficult neighbors before, but never had she felt this kind of creeping dread. Rick wasn't just cold. He exuded a kind of threatening, possessive energy. Amanda seemed to have no voice, and the children were like captives in fear. She walked through the gate of her garden and sat down in her rocking chair, her hands trembling slightly from the emotion. She wasn't sure if she should intervene if doing so would cause more trouble for Amanda and the kids. But at the same time, another thought crept into her mind. If I do nothing, what will happen to them? Sarah sat there for a long time, staring at the house next door with a growing sense of dread. It felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff where, if she wasn't careful, a tragedy might be looming. "Tomorrow," she promised herself, "tomorrow I have to do something." And with that thought, Sarah knew that her life would no longer be as peaceful as it had been. She knew she couldn't stand by. The next afternoon, Sarah was pruning the rose bushes in her garden, but her mind was still on the house next door. She couldn't shake the image of Ethan and Olivia's frightened eyes as they looked at Rick the day before. Rick's behavior reminded her of stories she had heard about domestic abuse stories that started with eerie silence and ended in tragedies. Everyone regretted not stepping in sooner. Sarah had considered knocking on Amanda's door again that morning, but something about Rick's demeanor made her hesitate. He seemed like a ticking time bomb, and she feared that her presence might make things worse for Amanda and the children. But she still couldn't shake the worry, and she had promised herself that if she saw any signs of trouble, she would act. That afternoon, as the sun began to fade and autumn breezes swept through the garden, Sarah suddenly noticed two small figures approaching her house. It was Ethan and Olivia. They were dressed in light clothes, walking quietly as if they didn't want anyone in their house to notice. They clung to each other, their eyes filled with fear and tension. Sarah's heart raced. Something was seriously wrong. She put down the pruning shears and quickly stepped to the gate. The children quickened their pace when they saw her open the gate, as if they had just escaped some unimaginable danger. Ethan and Olivia reached her, breathing heavily, and Sarah knelt down to meet their eyes. "What's wrong, kids?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with concern. "Is everything okay?" The children glanced quickly back toward their house, then at each other. It was clear they were afraid of something. After a moment of silence, Olivia, the little girl with large dark eyes, holding back tears, bowed her head and whispered, "Our stepdad doesn't like us." The simple statement was like a knife to Sarah's heart. She froze, her whole body stiffening. There was no need for further explanation. Sarah knew exactly what that meant. She knelt down, ignoring the ache in her knees from old age. "Does your stepdad hurt you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm, though a wave of fear surged inside her. Ethan bit his lip, his hand still gripping Olivia's tightly. It was clear the children didn't know whom they could trust, but they couldn't hide their fear any longer. He's always angry," Ethan said, his voice so small Sarah had to lean in closer to hear. "And Mom doesn't say anything." Olivia looked at Ethan, then whispered softly, "Whenever Mom does something wrong, he slams doors or yells. And sometimes we have to hide." Sarah felt like the air had been sucked from her lungs. These children were living in fear, and Amanda, their mother, was also trapped in terror, unable to resist. Their words weren't a misunderstanding or an exaggeration. They were the silent cries for help from a family being abused. Before Sarah could ask anything more, a loud, angry voice shouted from the direction of the house next door. "What are you doing over there? Get back here right now!" Sarah turned around to see Rick charging across the yard, his eyes blazing with fury. The two children immediately shrank back, their small hands clutching each other even tighter. The fear on their little faces was unmistakable. "We're sorry," Olivia squeaked, nearly choking on her words. "We have to go." Without waiting another second, the two children turned and ran back toward Rick. Rick grabbed them, squeezing their arms so tightly Sarah could feel their pain. He didn't say a word to her, just dragged the kids back toward the house as if they were his property. His arm was rigid, and the children stumbled as they tried to keep up. Sarah stood frozen in place, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. She could do nothing but watch as Rick hauled the children inside, then slammed the door shut with a force that echoed down the quiet street. In that moment, Sarah knew she couldn't wait any longer. Olivia and Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "Our stepdad doesn't like us." She didn't know exactly what was happening inside that house, but she knew she couldn't stand by and do nothing. She returned to her house, each step heavy as though she were carrying the weight of the world. When she sat down in her armchair, she grabbed the phone on the table and hesitated for a moment. Was she overreacting? If she called the police, would Amanda and her children be in even more danger? But then, the image of the terrified children, the way they clung to each other, and their wide, frightened eyes flashed in her mind. No, this wasn't her imagination. This was a cry for help. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she dialed the number. 911. The phone rang only once before a calm female voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? Sarah swallowed hard, her voice trembling, but steady. I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but I think there are children in danger next door. I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but I think there are children in danger next door. On the other end, the operator remained calm and professional. Thank you for calling. Can you give us more details? Have you heard or seen anything unusual? Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself before recounting everything. She spoke about the banging doors, the screams in the night, about Rick's rude and aggressive behavior when they met the day before. And finally, her brief conversation with the two children. She emphasized the fear in their eyes and their heartbreaking admission, "Our stepdad doesn't like us." The operator patiently listened, occasionally asking a few clarifying questions. When Sarah finished, the operator's tone became more serious. Thank you so much for reaching out, Mrs. Miller. We'll send officers over right away to check the situation. In the meantime, please stay inside and do not intervene. We'll update you as soon as we can. Sarah nodded, even though the operator couldn't see her. I'll do that, she whispered, before hanging up the phone. The house fell into silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock in the living room. Sarah's heart was still racing, and her hands trembled as she placed the phone down. She had done the right thing, she knew that, but the anxiety still clung to her. Had she really made the right call? Would the police arrive in time? And more importantly, would Amanda and the children be safe after all this? She stood up from her chair, unable to sit still any longer. She felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, where one wrong step could lead to disaster. Sarah paced the living room, occasionally glancing out the window, trying to reassure herself that the police would arrive soon and everything would be okay. But the longer she waited, the more worried she became. She wondered what might be happening inside that house. What could Rick be doing to Amanda and the kids right now? She thought of Ethan and Olivia's terrified faces, the way they clung to each other as if that was the only way they could protect themselves. Sarah couldn't imagine what the two children had endured. The more she thought about them, the more convinced she became that she had made the right decision. No matter what happened, she couldn't ignore this. Just then, the sound of sirens came from a distance. Sarah's shoulders relaxed a little, breathing a sigh of relief as she saw two police cars slowly turn onto her street. The flashing red and blue lights lit up the otherwise quiet neighborhood. The moment she had been waiting for had arrived. From behind her curtains, Sarah watched as 4 officers stepped out of the cars, each in uniform and with a determined air about them. They spoke quickly among themselves before splitting into 2 groups. One group heading toward Amanda's house, the other coming to Sarah's. A knock on the door startled Sarah, even though she had been expecting it. She hurried to the door and opened it, facing 2 police officers, a middle-aged man and a younger female officer. "Mrs. Miller?" the male officer asked, his voice calm yet firm. "We're here to check the situation you reported. Could you give us more details?" Sarah invited the officers inside and sat down on her chair. She recounted once again everything she had seen and heard over the past 2 days. She didn't hold back, expressing her deep concern that Amanda and the children were living in fear under Rick's control. She emphasized that the children had come to her, seeking help, and that she couldn't just stand by. When she finished, the female officer nodded, her expression serious. "Thank you, ma'am. You did the right thing by calling us. We're going to check things out now. Please stay inside and wait. We'll update you when we can." Sarah saw the officers out, her heart pounding as she watched them walk toward Amanda's house. She knew she couldn't do anything but wait, but the anxiety wouldn't let go. She returned to her window, peeking through the curtains, watching closely. She saw the 2 officers standing at Amanda's door, knocking and waiting. There was no response. They knocked again, this time louder. Finally, the door opened, and Sarah saw Amanda appear. She looked tired and scared, her eyes betraying the stress she was under. Rick appeared right behind Amanda, his large frame looming, his face full of anger. Even from a distance, Sarah could feel the menace radiating from him. Rick didn't greet the officers instead. He glared at them with pure hostility. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the conversation unfold. Rick's voice began to rise, his gestures aggressive as though trying to force the officers to leave. But they didn't back down. One of the officers gently pulled Amanda aside, attempting to speak with her privately. Rick immediately stepped forward, angrily shouting, "You can't separate my wife from me." Sarah held her breath as one of the officers quickly stepped between Rick and Amanda, holding Rick's shoulder firmly. The tension was palpable, and Sarah knew this was the critical moment. Everything could either end peacefully or explode into violence. Rick gritted his teeth, his whole body tensing as if ready to charge. "You can't talk to her without me!" he roared, yanking his arm as if to break free from the officer's grip. The tension was so tight, it felt like one wrong move would snap it. The female officer standing next to Amanda continued to speak to her, her voice calm yet resolute. Sarah, watching from behind her window, felt her heart pounding. It felt like she was watching a suspenseful movie where the outcome could change everything. Rick wasn't backing down. He suddenly wrenched free, lunging toward Amanda. "Mel, tell them nothing's happening." His voice shifted from anger to pleading. "We're fine, right? Everything's fine, right?" Amanda stepped back, trembling visibly, her eyes wide with fear and despair. "Rick, stop," she said weakly. But before she could say more, Rick reached out as if to grab her. The male officer reacted in an instant. He blocked Rick, pinning him against the side of the house with a firm push. "That's enough," he shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and endangering others." Rick struggled, thrashing violently. "You can't do this. I didn't do anything wrong. This is my house. You have no right." He screamed, but his shouts were drowned out by the sound of handcuffs clicking tightly around his wrists. Sarah stood in silence, her heart racing, feeling both fear and relief as she watched Rick being restrained. He had shown his true, violent nature. The other officers quickly moved in to help their colleague, forcing Rick toward the patrol car. Rick continued to yell, both angry and desperate. "Amanda, tell them! I love you! I love the kids too! Tell them!" Amanda stood there, her whole body shaking, her hands clutching her chest as though trying to hold herself together. The female officer stepped toward Amanda, her eyes kind but firm. "Do you want to tell us anything, Amanda?" Amanda closed her eyes as if gathering the last of her strength. When she opened them again, her gaze was filled with determination. "Not anymore," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "I can't live like this anymore. I want my children to be safe." Sarah almost wept when she heard those words. At last, Amanda had broken free from the chains of fear. The female officer nodded at Amanda, gently taking her hand in a gesture of support. "We'll make sure you and the children are safe," she said. "Can you tell us more about what's been going on?" Amanda lowered her head, tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of release. "He controlled everything," she began, her voice cracking piece by piece. "He made me feel like I couldn't live without him, but every day I felt like I was disappearing. And the kids," she choked back sobs, "the kids were always afraid, like if they did anything wrong, he would explode." The female officer took notes as Amanda spoke, while her colleagues kept Rick in the patrol car, now silent with only the sound of his angry, heavy breathing coming from inside. At that moment, the front door of the house swung open, and the two children, Ethan and Olivia, rushed outside. Their eyes darted around, and when they saw Amanda, they ran straight toward her. "Mom!" Ethan cried out, his voice filled with panic. He threw his arms around his mother, while Olivia clung tightly to her side, her hands trembling as she gripped Amanda's arm. From her window, Sarah watched the scene, tears streaming down her face. It was this moment when Amanda held her children tightly, despite all the pain that confirmed for Sarah that she had done the right thing. Amanda knelt down, wrapping her arms around her children. "It's going to be okay," she whispered to them, soothing them. "We're safe now. It's going to be okay." But their journey wasn't over yet, and Sarah knew she would continue to be there to support them in the difficult days ahead. The next morning, the house next door was quiet again, but this time it wasn't the oppressive silence of fear. It was the peace of a new beginning. Rick had been arrested, and Amanda, along with Ethan and Olivia, had been taken to the police station to give their statements and receive the help they needed. Sarah watched them leave from her window, feeling relieved yet aware that this was only the first step in the long road to healing for the family of three. That afternoon, after they returned from the police station, Sarah didn't hesitate any longer. She baked a fresh batch of cookies, walked through the gate she had once hesitated to cross, and rang Amanda's doorbell. This time, there were no angry shouts or defensive attitudes from someone behind the door. When Amanda opened the door, her face still looked tired, but there was something else in her eyes. Hope. "Hi, Amanda," Sarah said gently, with a friendly smile on her face. "I thought the kids might need someone to keep them company while you rest today. I brought some cookies for them if they'd like to come over and play." Amanda stood still for a moment, her eyes welling up with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Sarah simply smiled, gently squeezing Amanda's hand. "We'll get through this together," she said, her voice full of certainty. "Whenever you need me, I'll be here." From that day forward, Sarah and Amanda began building a close friendship. Sarah became the trusted friend Amanda and her children could rely on. Sarah wasn't just a neighbor anymore, she became a safe haven for them. Sarah's house was no longer cold and quiet like it used to be. Ethan and Olivia frequently visited, sitting at the small wooden table in her kitchen, enjoying freshly baked cookies and warm milk. Their laughter filled the house, bringing back the liveliness that Sarah had lost since her husband's passing. There were days when Amanda came over just to sit and have a cup of tea, sometimes in silence as she was still learning how to reclaim her life after the years of being controlled by Rick. Sarah sat quietly beside her, not saying much, just being there. And that was enough for Amanda to feel safe. When Amanda had to meet with lawyers or attend counseling sessions, Sarah happily took care of Ethan and Olivia. The children, once shy and fearful, gradually began to open up. Ethan became fascinated with the plants in Sarah's garden, constantly asking questions about the different types of flowers. Olivia loved helping Sarah bake, her giggles filling the kitchen as they decorated the little cookies together. Amanda and the children's recovery wasn't something that happened overnight. There were nights when Olivia would wake up from nightmares, and Ethan would grow quiet, avoiding any mention of Rick. Amanda, too, had to confront a wide range of emotions: fear, guilt for not leaving sooner, and the pain of letting her. Children go through such stressful days. But with Sarah always ready to listen and stand by her side, Amanda didn't have to walk through this journey alone. During the quiet afternoons together over tea, Sarah helped Amanda navigate the complex paperwork, from applying for legal aid to transferring the children to new schools. She also encouraged Amanda to continue attending counseling sessions, even when she felt like giving up. Gradually, the fear and heaviness began to fade. Amanda started to stand taller, gaining confidence with each passing day. Ethan and Olivia, once shy and tense, now filled Sarah's home with laughter and carefree mischief. One evening, while they were having dinner together, Olivia suddenly looked up and asked, "Mrs. Sarah, are you our guardian angel?" Sarah chuckled, feeling her heart warm. "No, sweetheart, I'm just your neighbor," she replied softly. Amanda looked at Sarah, her eyes brimming with emotion. "No, Mrs. Sarah," she whispered, taking Sarah's hand. "Your family." Sarah felt a deep happiness swell within her. She hadn't just helped Amanda and her children escape the darkness, she had also found meaning in her own life again. The peaceful days gradually passed, and Amanda, along with her two children, Ethan and Olivia, began to adjust to their new life, a life free from fear and control. Rick had been tried in court and sentenced to prison for domestic abuse and child endangerment. Amanda and her children were now free, but the journey to healing was still long and challenging. Sarah continued to stand by their side. Her house was no longer quiet and lonely like before, but always filled with the laughter and footsteps of two children. The kids now saw Sarah's house as their second home, a place where they found safety and love they had never known before. One morning, Sarah was watering her little garden when she heard familiar footsteps. Olivia and Ethan came running into the garden, each holding a flower they had picked from the fence nearby. Olivia smiled brightly and said, "Grandma, we're here to help you water the plants today." Sarah smiled, her heart warming, as if spring were blooming inside her. She recalled the early days when the children were shy and huddled together in fear every time they heard a loud noise. But now they were different, their eyes bright, their smiles radiant. The wounds in their hearts were slowly healing, day by day, with the patience and love from their mother and Sarah. Amanda often brought coffee to Sarah's house in the afternoons. The two women would sit together at the wooden table under the tree, not always talking much, but always finding peace in each other's presence. Sometimes Amanda would open up about her past, about the days of abuse and control. Sarah would listen without judgment, gently holding her hand, offering comfort that words could not convey. "I don't think I could have done this without you," Amanda once said, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You've already done it," Sarah replied, her voice filled with pride. "You're stronger than you ever thought you were." On a winter evening, Amanda and her children prepared a special dinner to thank Sarah for everything she had done. Amanda's small house was filled with the aroma of soup and baked goods, and the joyful sounds of laughter echoed through the cold air. When Sarah walked in, the chill from outside seemed to disappear as she was greeted by warm smiles. "Grandma Sarah, sit here," Ethan exclaimed, pulling out a chair for her to sit next to him. Olivia placed a warm apple pie in front of her, a version of the pie Sarah had brought to them the first day they met. Amanda raised her glass with a sincere smile. "This is for you, Sarah," she said. "Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for believing, even when I didn't believe I could escape." Sarah smiled, her eyes welling with tears. She never imagined she would find a new family at her age, but now she had them, and they had her. After dinner, the two children ran to her, each placing a small gift in her hands. Sarah curiously opened them to find a family photo frame, a picture of Amanda, Ethan, Olivia, and Sarah together, taken on a sunny afternoon in the garden. In the photo, they were all smiling, a genuine smile with no shadows of the past. Olivia looked up at her, her eyes sparkling. "You know, Grandma, you're our angel." Sarah chuckled, gently brushing Olivia's soft hair. "I'm just your neighbor, sweetheart," she said softly. Amanda rested her hand on Sarah's shoulder, her own eyes misty. "No, Grandma Sarah," she said. "You are our family." As winter passed and spring returned, Sarah realized that loneliness was truly a thing of the past. Her home was no longer a place of solitude for an old woman, but a gathering place filled with laughter and love. Cozy dinners, sunny afternoons in the garden, and endless conversations had turned her life into a new journey, filled with meaning. Every time she saw Amanda, now more confident and strong than ever, Sarah felt proud. Amanda had overcome her past and built a new future for herself and her children. Ethan and Olivia, too, had found joy in their new life, no longer weighed down by fear. Their laughter now echoed through the peaceful neighborhood, bringing the vitality Sarah had once longed for. On a warm afternoon at the end of spring, Sarah sat on her familiar rocking chair, watching Amanda and the children play in the garden. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting a golden glow over everything. Sarah closed her eyes, taking a deep breath and savoring the scent of flowers in the air. She needed nothing more. She had found her family, and this time she knew they would always be together, facing whatever challenges came their way and building a bright future. The story of Sarah, Amanda, Ethan, and Olivia reminds us that kindness and courage can change the lives of others and our own. Sometimes, a small act or an outstretched hand at the right moment can bring hope and healing. No one should have to face hardship alone. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to stay connected and not miss other meaningful stories. Together, let's spread love and build a better world, one story at a time.